February 9th, 1969. Sunday lunch at Ario's restaurant. The most protected table in all of New York. Don Ettore Bianchi's corner. No invitation. No phone call. No warning. Frank Lucas walked through that front door alone, in a dark suit, and headed straight for the back. Every man in that room put his hand on his jacket. Bianchi didn't even turn around. 17 minutes later, Frank Lucas walked out with a contract that changed the map of New York. This is what happened in those 17 minutes. February 9th, 1969. 1:17 p.m. Ario's restaurant, East Harlem. Sunday lunch service. The kind of afternoon when the city moves slowly and the light comes through the windows at an angle that makes everything look slightly more permanent than it is. Ario's on a Sunday was not a public restaurant. It had not been a public restaurant on Sundays for the better part of a decade. The tables were occupied by invitation, by arrangement, by the specific understanding that certain rooms exist for certain people, and that the boundary between those people and everyone else is maintained not by signs or locks but by something more reliable than either. Reputation. History. The accumulated weight of what everyone in the room already knows about everyone else. On this particular Sunday, the back corner table, the table that had been reserved for the same family for longer than most of the staff had been alive, was occupied by Don Ettore Bianchi. 67 years old. 41 years in the life. A man whose name appeared in no official record connected to anything illegal and whose actual influence on the movement of money and power in the northeastern United States was, by any reasonable estimate, more substantial than that of most elected officials. He was eating veal. He was drinking a glass of Barolo that had been opened 40 minutes before his arrival. He was in conversation with two men whose names also appeared in no relevant official records. The lunch had been going well. At 1:17 p.m., the front door of Ario's restaurant opened. The man who came through it was not on any list. He had not called ahead. He had not been invited. He had not sent word through any of the intermediary channels by which one secured an audience with Don Ettore Bianchi. He had simply arrived, alone, in a dark suit with a white pocket square, and he stood in the entrance of the restaurant for a moment while his eyes adjusted and while every person in the room processed what they were seeing. Frank Lucas was 43 years old. He had been operating in Harlem for 15 years. In those 15 years, he had built an organization that by early 1969 was generating more revenue than most of the individual operations run by the families whose territory technically surrounded his. He had developed his own supply chain, his own distribution network, his own system of information and protection that functioned independently of every arrangement that the established powers of the New York Underworld had spent decades constructing. He had never, in 15 years, walked uninvited into a room that belonged to Ettore Bianchi. Until now, the reaction in the restaurant was immediate and wordless. Two men near the front moved without being asked to move. A third, near the kitchen door, put his hand inside his jacket without completing the motion. The two men with Bianchi at the back table both turned toward the entrance with a particular attention of people whose job it is to pay attention. Bianchi himself did not turn. He took a small sip of his wine, set the glass down precisely, and continued to look at the wall in front of him with the expression of a man deciding something. Frank Lucas walked toward the back table. Not quickly, at the pace of a man who has somewhere to be and has budgeted the appropriate amount of time for getting there. He passed the two men near the front without acknowledging them. He passed the third near the kitchen door without breaking stride. He reached the back corner table and stood at the end of it, equidistant from both of Bianchi's companions, and he waited. Bianchi looked up. There was a silence of approximately 7 seconds. In the grammar of that room, 7 seconds was a very long silence. Then Bianchi said, in English, that Frank Lucas must want something very badly to come here this way. Frank Lucas said he wanted 20 minutes. Bianchi looked at him for another 3 seconds. Then he gestured, almost imperceptibly, and his two companions stood and moved to a table across the room. One of them looked at Frank Lucas as he passed. The look contained a specific message. Frank Lucas received the message and gave no indication that he had. Frank Lucas sat down. He did not open with an apology for arriving unannounced. He did not offer an explanation for why he had chosen this method over the conventional alternatives. He did not perform the particular ritual of deference that the situation might have been expected to require. He sat down and he said that he was going to explain a business situation and that he was going to propose a solution and that he thought Bianchi would find the proposal worth the 20 minutes. Bianchi picked up his fork and resumed eating. He did not say proceed, but his posture said it. Frank Lucas talked for 11 minutes. What he described was a specific problem in the geography of the city's narcotics distribution that had been creating friction for both their operations for the previous 8 months. A corridor in the South Bronx that connected Harlem to the port access points in the east. The corridor was currently controlled by a mid-level operation that belonged, nominally, to neither Frank Lucas nor to the Bianchi family, but that had been extracting a transit tax from both with a particular confidence of something small that has made itself necessary. The mid-level operation was run by a man named DeLuca, no relation to any family, who had positioned himself cleverly in a geographic gap and had been profiting from it for 2 years. Frank Lucas said he had a solution. He said that he had spent the previous 4 months acquiring, quietly and without anyone noticing, 3 of the 4 legitimate businesses that DeLuca used as fronts for his financial operations. He said that the 4th was in the process of being acquired and would be complete within the week. He said that once the 4th acquisition closed, DeLuca's financial infrastructure would cease to exist, his operation would collapse within 30 days, and the corridor in the South Bronx would be open. Bianchi had stopped eating. Frank Lucas said that he was not proposing to take the corridor for himself. He was proposing a shared arrangement. Specific percentages, specific territorial acknowledgments, specific protocols for the movement of product through the corridor that would benefit both operations and eliminate the 8 months of friction. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. On it were numbers. Clean, specific, unambiguous. Bianchi looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time. Long enough that Frank Lucas, who was not a man who required conversations to be filled, simply waited. Then Bianchi said one word. He said how. Frank Lucas said how what? Bianchi said how did you acquire 3 businesses without anyone knowing? Frank Lucas said that was a different conversation. Bianchi looked at him. Something in his expression had changed in a way that was subtle enough that only someone watching very carefully would have noticed it. The change was the specific shift from assessment to recognition. He had been assessing Frank Lucas since the moment he walked through the door. Now he recognized something. He picked up the sheet of paper. He read it again, more slowly this time, in the manner of a man who has already decided but who is confirming the details. He set it back down on the table. He took a sip of his wine. He said the numbers on the left column needed to move 2 points. Frank Lucas said they could move 1 point. Bianchi said 1.5. Frank Lucas said 1.5 was acceptable. Bianchi nodded once. He picked up his fork. He said that he would have the appropriate people contact the appropriate people to confirm the arrangements. He said that the 4th acquisition should be completed before any further steps were taken. Frank Lucas said the 4th acquisition would be complete by Friday. Bianchi said then they would speak again on Friday. Frank Lucas stood up. He straightened his jacket. He said he appreciated the 20 minutes. Bianchi said, without looking up from his plate, that Frank Lucas had taken 17. Frank Lucas said he would remember that. He walked back through the restaurant at the same unhurried pace at which he had entered. The 2 men near the front watched him go. The man near the kitchen door had removed his hand from his jacket at some point during the preceding 17 minutes and was now simply standing, watching. Frank Lucas passed all 3 of them without breaking stride, and he pushed through the front door of RAO's restaurant and stepped out onto the street. Behind him, in the back corner of the restaurant, Ettore Bianchi finished his veal and drank his wine and said nothing for several minutes. Then he said, to the 2 men who returned to his table after Frank Lucas left, that he wanted everything they had on Frank Lucas's acquisition of those 3 businesses. He wanted to understand the mechanism. He wanted to know who had helped him and how and at what cost. His man said they would find out. Bianchi said find out quickly. He said that a man who could acquire 3 businesses in 8 months without anyone in this city noticing was a man you wanted to understand before you formalized any arrangement with him. His man said understood. Bianchi said also find out how he knew about the corridor problem. Because we have been discussing it internally for 8 months, and this man walked in here with a solution that he has apparently been constructing for 4 of those months, which means he knew about our problem before we had finished identifying it ourselves. There was a silence. Bianchi said that was not a comfortable thing to realize about someone you are about to do business with. But it was better to realize it now than later. The 4th acquisition closed on Thursday, 1 day ahead of schedule. The arrangements were confirmed on Friday through the appropriate channels. The corridor in the South Bronx was open within 6 weeks of the lunch at RAO's. DeLuca's operation, deprived of its financial infrastructure, did not survive the month. The contract that Frank Lucas walked out of RAO's with that Sunday afternoon was not a piece of paper. It was an understanding. The kind of understanding that in that world carried more weight than any signed document, because it was built not on paper but on the demonstrated capacity of both parties to do exactly what they had said they would do. Frank Lucas had said the fourth acquisition would close by Friday. It closed Thursday. Ettore Bianchi had said the arrangements would be confirmed through appropriate channels. They were confirmed that same Friday. Both men had done what they said. That was the contract. In the years that followed, the story of the Sunday lunch at RAO's traveled through the New York underworld in the particular way that stories travel when they illuminate something people already suspected but had not yet seen confirmed. The version that lasted was not precise in its details. The 17 minutes became 20. The numbers shifted in the retelling. Bianchi's two companions were sometimes 3, sometimes 1. But the center held in every version. Frank Lucas had walked uninvited into the most protected table in Little Italy, had sat down across from Ettore Bianchi, and had walked out 40 minutes later with an arrangement that expanded his operational reach into territory he had not previously touched. Not through threat, not through intimidation, not through the conventional currencies of that world. Through preparation. Through the specific audacity of a man who had solved a problem that affected both parties before either party had formally acknowledged the problem existed, and who had arrived to present the solution in the one setting that made declining it more costly than accepting it. Walking uninvited into Ettore Bianchi's Sunday lunch was not recklessness. It was calculation. It said, more clearly than any intermediary conversation could have said, that Frank Lucas understood the room, understood the man in it, and had decided that the risk of arrival was lower than the cost of waiting for an invitation that might never come. Bianchi, who understood calculation, understood this. That was why the contract held. That was why, when people in that world wanted to explain what Frank Lucas was, not what he did, but what he was, they often returned to that Sunday afternoon. The door opening, the walk to the back table, the 17 minutes, the single sheet of paper with numbers on it, and the front door, closing behind him, at 1:34 p.m. on a February Sunday in 1969. He had walked in without an invitation. He had walked out with everything he came for. Ettore Bianchi spent the rest of that afternoon trying to understand how Frank Lucas had acquired 3 businesses in 8 months without anyone in New York noticing. He never fully found out. Because Frank Lucas didn't walk into that restaurant to impress anyone. He walked in because he had already done the work. And the only thing left was to sit down across from the right man and let the preparation speak for itself. If this story hit different, subscribe, hit the bell. The next one makes this look like a warm-up.